It was coming off the stand-up boom of the 80s, and it was just a totally separate thing. I only knew of a couple of people who did both stand-up and improv. And usually, in the improv world at the time, it was like you could really tell the stand-up because they would be
they'd be the one doing the puns.
Yeah, they'd be doing jokes the whole time. They would just like start a scene and like, here, let me tell you a joke. And it's like, no, there's a scene going on here. We got to figure out what's funny between the two of us. And when I lived in New York for 7 years, and the New York comedy scene was much more integrated, where people who were doing improv and stand-up and sketch mixed it a little bit more, knew a bit more of each other, and people would try to go back and forth. So there are people I got to know in the improv world who have gone on to be fairly successful stand-ups, people like Mike Birbiglia I met back when he was a student at the Upright Citizens Brigade. A
lot of improvisers from, say, 25 years ago, when I meet them, they're not as smiley as improvisers that I meet now. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of improvisers these days are pretty smiley. You know what I'm talking about? Compared to comics, they smile a lot.
I suppose, yeah. Maybe it was a very small subculture, maybe kind of a depressed, dark, heavy drinking subculture. I think that drinking part has definitely changed.
What do you mean?
Well, back in the day, when I started in Chicago, it seemed like everybody drank and everybody smoked, or not everybody, but it was many more people smoked than they do now. And we had, the guru, Del Close at the time, would say things to us like, you should always have 2 drinks before a show, but the problem is, who can stop at 2 drinks? And openly talked about, doing drugs before shows and things like that in class. So not that he really encouraged us to do that, but it wasn't unusual at all for people to have a couple drinks before a show. And when I moved back to Chicago in 2010, and I would literally have 1 beer before a show, and my partner at the time looked at me like I was just awful. I was an awful person for having a drink before a show. And it's strange because I thought about it later. Like, as an actor, whenever I've acted, I would never have a drink before a show because I just need like this level of concentration to remember my lines and not screw up. But as an improviser, it's kind of like, I'll have a couple drinks and not really think anything of it.
For you, what was the end goal when you got into improv?
Well, I was still focused on being an actor, and I wanted to make movies, and improv was kind of like a fun side thing. But as things go, it kind of sucks you in. I got a lot more offers to perform as an improviser. It just slowly sort of became my job as well as my hobby, I guess. And it kind of just pushed acting to the side for the most part.
So you had no goals of SNL, no goals of I want to write for television?
I didn't even want to work for Second City.
Really?
I mean, this was... Second City, when I first came to town, I went to see a couple of shows, and I was kind of a snotty 20-year-old, 22-year-old, whatever, and had done important theater. And I wasn't that impressed. Why? It was like, well, some of the scenes are funny and some of the scenes aren't, and it wasn't interconnected in any way. It didn't seem like a show. It seemed like just a series of comedy sketches, some of which were good and some weren't. So I just decided that wasn't my goal, and I wanted to do straight theater, and I wanted to do just straight up improv, like they did at Improv Olympic. And I realized later that was probably a huge mistake, because by the time I was getting to the point where I would have been thought of as someone who could be hired by Second City, they started doing really interesting things. They had these shows. Pinata Full of Bees was the first one.
What was that?
Pinata Full of Bees is like this legendary Second City show. I can't remember the name of the director, but some of the people involved were like Adam McKay, John Glazier. I can't remember the cast. But what they did was they came in and they kind of overturned the apple cart in every way they could think of.
Yes, come in.
Hello.
Mr. Grissom, how are you?
Jerry, have a seat. Come on in. What can I do you for?
Well, I called you into my office, actually.
Okay.
Well, it's not often we get the higher-ups coming over to the 3rd floor now, is it?
Well, I like to come down and see what the lowers are doing.
Yeah. Mr. Grissom, I don't know if you remember a couple weeks ago we had you take a standard psych test for the insurance companies.
I remember.
This had an IQ portion to it, some judgment questions.
I'm tracking with you.
Well, some of the results we got back were a little surprising.
Great.
So I'd like to run him by and get some feedback.
Good, Jerry. Super duper.
Mr. Grissom, according to these test results, you're legally retarded. Hard to say that in a polite way, but
They didn't start the show with a big musical number. The title wasn't a pun. The title was actually based on something that happened
Are you
in the
annoyed by
shows.
that as well? That really bothers me when I see that.
It bothers me less over the years. It bothered me more back then when I didn't think the shows were that great.